The sharp cackle of Airman First Class Taryn Quill cut through the hum of the logistics warehouse at Eglin Air Base. He thought he was slick, tossing jabs at the reserved captain whose burn-scarred hands peeked from beneath her neatly pressed uniform cuffs. Captain Lyra Voss never flinched at his barbs, her gray eyes locking onto him with a quiet intensity that made his smirk falter. Then the base commander, a 3-star general, strode in, and the air shifted. The warehouse stilled as he called her Spectre and offered a crisp salute that no captain should ever receive. In that instant, Taryn realized the woman he'd been mocking was no ordinary officer. She was the mythic shadow of Operation Nightfall. Captain Lyra Voss moved through the warehouse with a steady rhythm, her tablet balanced in one hand as she cross-checked supply logs against the day's manifests. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her uniform, though crisp, bore faint creases from hours spent in the humid Florida air. The scars on her hands, pale, puckered lines like cracked earth, were impossible to miss as she tapped the screen. The warehouse buzzed with activity. Forklifts whirred, crates thudded onto pallets, and the sharp tang of engine grease hung heavy in the air, a scent Lyra barely registered anymore. She marked another entry, her handwriting digital but precise. "Captain, the new circuit boards are stowed in Bay 3, called Technical Sergeant Mara Cade, a wiry veteran with sun-bleached hair who'd been at Eglin longer than most. Lyra nodded. "Any discrepancies, Sergeant?" Her voice was calm, professional, cutting through the din without effort. "None, ma'am. All accounted for." Mara's tone carried the ease of someone who'd wrangled logistics through 2 decades of chaos. Their exchange was brief, unremarkable to the untrained ear, but Mara's eyes lingered on Lyra a moment longer, a silent nod passing between them before she turned back to her work. It was subtle, the kind of gesture you'd miss unless you were looking for it. Across the warehouse, Taryn Quill leaned against a crate, his crisp fatigue still stiff from lack of wear. 3 weeks out of technical training, he'd arrived at Eglin with a pack of fellow airmen who treated his every quip like gospel. His confidence outstripped his experience, and he wore it like a badge. "Get a load of Captain Cinder," he muttered to his crew, nodding toward Lyra's scarred hands. "Looks like she tangled with a welder and lost." His buddies snickered, their laughter just loud enough to carry across the warehouse, but not enough to draw formal reprimand. They were still testing the waters, learning how far they could push before someone pushed back. Lyra approached their section, her steps deliberate, her focus on the tablet unwavering. She didn't glance at Taryn or his group, but the slight tilt of her head suggested she'd heard every word. "Stand at attention," snapped Staff Sergeant Elias Torin from nearby, his voice like gravel. The airmen straightened, though their posture leaned more toward performance than respect. As Lyra passed, Taryn couldn't resist. "Careful with those supply logs, Captain," he called, his tone dripping with mock concern. "Wouldn't want you to get burned by paperwork." The warehouse didn't go silent. It never did, but a ripple of tension spread. Tools paused, eyes flicked between Taryn and Lyra. A few senior enlisted exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Lyra stopped, turning slowly to face him. Her face wasn't angry, just calm. Too calm, like the still air before a storm. Her gray eyes met his, and for a moment, Taryn felt a prickle of unease he couldn't name. She held his gaze, unblinking, until he shifted uncomfortably. Then, without a word, she resumed her rounds. "What's her deal?" Taryn muttered, shaking off the strange chill her look had left behind. A grizzled loadmaster nearby didn't look up from his clipboard. "Might want to dial it back, kid." "Why? She's just a logistics officer. Probably got those scars from a bad day with a soldering iron." The loadmaster snorted but said nothing, his silence heavier than any lecture. Taryn, too full of himself, missed the warning. Throughout the morning, Lyra worked with her usual precision. She guided a young airman through a faulty inventory scanner, her instructions patient but firm. She updated supply records, coordinated with the depot, and signed off on delivery manifests. She moved through the warehouse like a shadow, present, yet apart from the easy banter that flowed around her. Terran watched her from the corner of his eye, curiosity gnawing despite himself. He noticed how the older NCOs treated her differently, with a respect that went beyond her rank. They listened when she spoke, their usual grumbling absent. Later, the warehouse crew was summoned to the daily operations briefing in the command hub. Terran slouched in the back with his friends, trading hushed jokes as the room filled. Colonel Jonas Brandt, the base commander, stepped to the front. "Morning, everyone. Let's make this quick." The briefing covered routine updates, supply chain bottlenecks, upcoming exercises, maintenance schedules. Terran half listened, his attention drifting until Lyra spoke up. "Sir, if I may," she said, her voice cutting through the room's low hum. All eyes turned. She rarely spoke in these meetings. Brandt nodded, a touch of impatience in his posture. "Go ahead, Captain." The delay in the radar components could be bypassed by rerouting the secondary power relays, Lyra said, her tone steady. "We tested it on the prototype last year. The specs in the archives should confirm compatibility." Brandt blinked, then nodded slowly. "Good catch, Captain. I'd overlooked that. Get it done." Terran frowned, his mind snagging on the exchange. Since when did a logistics captain know classified radar systems inside out? And why did a colonel take her word without question? As the briefing wrapped, Terran watched Lyra gather her tablet and exchange a few words with a major from operations. Her movements were efficient, unhurried, but something about her presence felt heavier now, like she carried a weight he couldn't see. Terran caught up to Lyra in the hallway outside the command hub, his curiosity overriding his better judgment. "Hey, Captain," he called, jogging to close the distance. She turned, her expression as unreadable as ever. Up close, her scars were more than just marks. They were deep, uneven ridges, the kind that spoke of fire or shrapnel, not accidents. "Private," she acknowledged with a slight nod, her voice neutral. Terran grinned, though it felt forced. "Just thought you might want some tips on handling those inventory scanners. Keep those hands safe, you know?" He gestured toward her scars, his tone teasing but laced with a challenge. Lyra's movement was subtle, a slight shift of her weight that put distance between his hand and hers. It wasn't defensive, but precise, like a reflex honed by years of instinct. "I appreciate the concern, Private," she said evenly, "but I've got it covered." A passing maintenance chief, his face lined from years in the field, gave Lyra a nod that carried an odd weight, like he was addressing someone far above his pay grade. Terran's grin faltered. Something wasn't adding up. The chief's nod, the way Lyra carried herself, the scars that told a story he couldn't read, it all gnawed at him. "Just trying to help, ma'am," he said, recovering his smirk. "Wouldn't want you getting hurt around all this heavy equipment." Lyra's eyes flickered, not with anger, but with something sharper, like she was sizing him up and finding him lacking. "Safety's key," she replied, her voice calm but pointed. "So is knowing when to pick a fight and when to walk away." She held his gaze a moment longer, then turned and continued down the hall. Terran stood rooted, her words echoing in his head. It wasn't a threat, but it landed like one, cutting through his bravado. "You're poking a hornet's nest, Quill," Staff Sergeant Elias Torrin said, appearing behind him. Terran turned, startled. "What's that supposed to mean, Sergeant?" Torrin's eyes were hard, but not cruel. "This base has layers you haven't seen yet, kid. People who aren't what they seem. Focus on your job and quit trying to play comedian." Terran opened his mouth to argue, but Torrin's look silenced him. The conversation was over. For the rest of the day, Terran couldn't shake the feeling he'd missed something critical. He watched Lyra from a distance as she moved through the warehouse, her quiet efficiency drawing no attention, yet commanding it from those who knew better. The senior NCOs spoke to her with a deference that didn't match her captain's bars. A maintenance tech asked her a question about a hydraulic system, and she answered with a clarity that made the tech nod in awe. Terran's unease grew. Who was she, really? As the shift ended, Taryn lingered in the warehouse, watching Lyra finish her final checks. She stood by a stack of crates, speaking softly with Technical Sergeant Mara Cade. Their voices were too low to hear, but Mara's usual gruffness softened, her posture almost reverent. Lyra glanced out at the tarmac, where the setting sun painted the runway in hues of orange and gold. For a fleeting moment, her guarded expression slipped, revealing something raw. Nostalgia, maybe? Or loss. Then it was gone, and she vanished into the twilight, leaving Taryn with a tangle of questions he couldn't voice. 2 days later, the base was thrown into chaos by an unannounced visit from General Arlen Holt, a 3-star commander from Air Combat Command. The logistics warehouse buzzed with frantic energy as airmen scrambled to prepare. Taryn and his crew were pulled from their usual duties to set up the command hub for a briefing. He grumbled as he arranged chairs and stacked folders, his pride bruised by the menial work. "I didn't ace tech training to play maid for some brass," he muttered, tossing a folder onto the table. "Quit whining, Quill," one of his peers shot back. "Finish up, and we're out of here." Taryn's complaints grew louder when Lyra entered the hub, her tablet in hand, checking systems with her usual precision. "Look who's here," he said, loud enough for his friends to hear, but not quite insubordinate. "Captain Burnout, ready to dazzle us with her paperwork skills." His buddies chuckled, though their laughter lacked its usual enthusiasm. Taryn felt the shift, but doubled down. "Hey, Captain, heard about the inspection? Better make sure those logs are spotless. Wouldn't want another accident." Lyra didn't react, her focus on her terminal unbroken. Her silence stung more than any retort would have. Taryn opened his mouth for another jab when the hub's doors swung open. "Attention on deck!" someone barked. General Holt strode in, his uniform heavy with ribbons that told of a storied career. His entourage of colonels and majors trailed behind, their faces tight with the weight of the visit. Everyone snapped to attention, Taryn a half-second late. Colonel Brandt stepped forward. "Welcome to Eglin, General. It's an honor." "Line height? Normal. Honor." Holt waved a hand. "At ease. This is an informal visit, Colonel. I was at the Pensacola summit and thought I'd stop by to see how our Gulf Coast hub is holding up." The room relaxed slightly, though the tension lingered. Holt began his tour, asking sharp questions about operations and pausing to inspect equipment displays. Lyra stood at her station, her posture rigid, her face a mask of calm professionalism. Then Holt froze mid-step, his weathered face breaking into a look of stunned recognition. "Spectre," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is that you?" The hum of the command hub fell silent, save for the faint whir of cooling fans. Senior officers exchanged quick glances, some whispering to aides. "The Spectre? From Nightfall?" Taryn's stomach twisted. Every veteran in the room seemed to straighten, their eyes darting between the general and the captain they'd overlooked for weeks. Something big was happening, and Taryn was on the outside, grasping for context. "It's good to see you, sir," Lyra Voss replied, her voice steady, but her gray eyes betraying a flicker of something. Memory, perhaps, or unease. The command hub held its breath. Then, in a moment that seared itself into Taryn Quill's mind, General Arlen Holt, a 3-star commander who oversaw air operations across half the continent, raised his hand in a crisp salute to Captain Lyra Voss. The breach of protocol was staggering. Generals didn't salute captains, not unless something extraordinary was at play. Taryn's jaw slackened, his earlier mockery replaying in his head like a bad film reel. "Major Voss," Holt said warmly, his voice carrying a reverence that silenced the room further. "It's been too long." "Major?" Taryn's mind reeled. Whispers from tech school flooded back, tales of a covert operative known only as Spectre, the mastermind behind Operation Nightfall, a mission so classified it was spoken of in hushed fragments. A rescue op in hostile territory, a diplomatic crisis averted, a ghost who vanished into legend. Taryn's throat tightened as he realized he'd been taunting not just an officer, but a myth. "For operational security, sir," Lyra said softly, her glance sweeping the room, noting the stunned faces. "Of course," Holt nodded, catching her meaning. But maintenance? They couldn't find a better post for you? His tone was half teasing, half disbelieving. I requested this, sir, Lyra replied, her voice firm, closing the door on further discussion. It suits me. Holt's smile was knowing. Always dodging the limelight, Spectre. Some things never change. He turned to the room, his presence commanding every eye. For those unaware, you've been working beside one of the sharpest tactical minds in our force. Major Voss led operations that don't make the history books, but shape them nonetheless. Terran felt the ground shift beneath him. Every snide comment, every smirk, every jab about her scars crashed back with nauseating clarity. He'd been mocking a hero, someone whose actions were so covert most didn't even know her real name. Holt continued. Major Voss was the force behind Operation Nightfall. If you're senior enough, you might have heard the name. If not, know this. When the impossible needed doing, we sent Spectre. Lyra stood rigid, her composure unshaken, but her eyes betraying discomfort at the spotlight. It was the most emotion Terran had seen from her since he'd arrived. Sir, perhaps we could discuss this privately? She suggested, her tone respectful, but edged with steel. Holt chuckled. Always the professional. Very well. Colonel Brandt, your office? Brandt nodded quickly. Of course, General. As they moved toward the private office, Terran couldn't look at Lyra. Shame burned through him, eroding the cocky facade he'd worn like armor. The room erupted into whispers as the door closed. Senior NCOs explained Spectre's legend to wide-eyed juniors, while officers huddled, piecing together the implications of a covert legend working logistics at their base. I told you to back off, Technical Sergeant Mara Cade said, appearing beside Terran. Some people aren't what they seem. I didn't know, Terran muttered, his voice barely audible. That was the point, Mara replied, her tone sharp but not unkind. Question is, what now? Terran had no answer. His mind churned, replaying weeks of arrogance through the lens of this new truth. Lyra's quiet competence, the respect she commanded from veterans, the scars that spoke of battles beyond his comprehension. 20 minutes later, the office door opened. Holt emerged, followed by Brandt and Lyra, their faces unreadable. Resume your duties, Holt announced. Major Voss remains in her current role as she prefers. Her identity and past are classified. Outside this room, she's Captain Voss, logistics officer. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed. Holt gave Lyra a small smile. Captain, join me for the rest of the tour? Of course, sir, she replied, her voice steady. As they passed Terran, Holt's eyes locked onto him. Name? Airman? Terran snapped to attention. Airman First Class Quill, sir. Holt studied him, then glanced at Lyra. Something unspoken passed between them. Carry on, Holt said, moving on. Terran stayed at attention until they left, then slumped against the wall, exhaling shakily. Staff Sergeant Elias Torin approached. You look like you need a breather, Quill. Yes, Sergeant, Terran said, his voice hollow. Outside, the Florida sun blazed, its warmth clashing with the chill in his bones. I screwed up, didn't I? He asked Torin, who'd followed him out. Monumentally, Torin said, not sugarcoating it. But you're not the first hotshot to learn the hard way. Won't be the last. Terran's eyes drifted to Lyra's scars in his mind. Those scars, not from equipment accidents, are they? Torin gave him a look like he'd stated the obvious. No, they're from dragging wounded out of a collapsing bunker under fire, from shielding a squad from a blast, from ops you'll never read about. Terran swallowed, the weight of his ignorance crushing. Why's she here then? In logistics? Torin shrugged. Some run toward glory, others run from it. The ones who run from it have usually seen things we can't imagine. Terran Quill stood at his terminal in the command hub, his hands idle on the keyboard, his mind far from the task at hand. Across the room, Major Lyra Voss, still Captain Voss to anyone outside the inner circle, moved through her duties with the same quiet precision as always. The revelation of her true identity had shifted the air at Eglin Air Base like a storm passing through, leaving everything subtly altered. Airmen stole glances at her, their whispers a mix of awe and disbelief. Senior officers, who days ago had barely acknowledged her, now approached with quiet deference, some offering veiled nods to past operations they could only hint at. Lyra met their attention with the same calm dignity she'd shown when invisible, her scarred hands steady as she worked. Terran's stomach churned with regret. Every taunt, every smug remark about her scars replayed in his mind, each one now a sharp reminder of his own arrogance. He'd dismissed her as a paper pusher, a nobody, when she was anything but. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Staff Sergeant Elias Torrens said, leaning against Terran's station with a knowing glint in his eye. "I didn't know," Terran muttered, his voice barely audible. "How could I have known?" Torrens' expression softened, but only slightly. "That's the thing, Quill. You weren't supposed to. Those scars you mocked. She got them pulling a team out of a firefight in the Hindu Kush. Carried a wounded operator 4 miles, both hands torn up by shrapnel. Didn't flinch, didn't stop. That's who you've been needling." Terran's throat tightened, the image vivid and brutal. Why's she here then? Doing logistics? She could be running ops, or at the Pentagon, or retired on some beach. Torrens' gaze drifted to Lyra, who was explaining a supply chain issue to a young airman with patient clarity. Sometimes, after you've seen what she has, the quiet work feels like salvation. Logistics was her first trade before she went special ops. Maybe she's here to remember what it's like to fix things instead of breaking them. The words hit Terran like a punch. He'd always seen logistics as a stepping stone, a grunt job for those who couldn't hack something flashier. But watching Lyra, seeing the quiet pride in her precision, the way she guided others without fanfare, he began to see the dignity in it. Later that afternoon, Terran found himself alone with Lyra in the equipment locker, sent to retrieve a set of diagnostic tools. She was already there, reviewing logs at a small desk, her scarred hands illuminated by the dim glow of a tablet. She glanced up as he froze in the doorway. "Private Quill," she said, her tone neutral but not cold. Terran stood at attention, his heart hammering. "Ma'am, Major, I need to apologize." His voice cracked, the weight of his words heavy. "The things I said about your scars, about you being just a logistics officer, I had no idea." Lyra's eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. "At ease, Private," she said calmly. "You weren't meant to know." Her directness disarmed him, but I was disrespectful, insubordinate. "You were," she agreed, no venom in her voice, just fact. Terran floundered, expecting anger but finding none. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his bravado gone. Lyra rolled down her sleeves, the scars disappearing beneath the fabric. "Scars carry stories, Private. Not all of them are for sharing. Judge less, observe more. That's enough." She gathered her tablet and moved toward the door, pausing briefly. "Everyone stumbles, Quill. What matters is what you do after you see your mistake." She left, and Terran stood alone, her words echoing in the quiet. The next morning, he arrived at the warehouse early, his usual smirk replaced by a quiet focus. He tackled his tasks without complaint, his eyes occasionally drifting to Lyra as she trained a group of new airmen on supply chain protocols. Her voice was steady, her scarred hands gesturing with purpose. "She's good," Technical Sergeant Mara Cade said, appearing at Terran's side as he inventoried a shipment. "Always was, even before she became Spectre." Terran nodded, watching Lyra correct an airman's technique with gentle precision. "Why come back to this after everything?" Mara's eyes followed Lyra. "Some find peace in the work itself, in making things run smoothly. After years of chaos, maybe she needed to build instead of destroy." Over the next 2 weeks, the base settled into a strange new rhythm. For security, Lyra was still Captain Voss to outsiders, but the respect she commanded was palpable. Airmen listened more closely when she spoke, their questions tinged with curiosity about the legend in their midst. Terran changed, too. He shed his need to impress with quips, focusing instead on mastering the systems he'd once scoffed at. When he worked near Lyra, their interactions were professional, the old hostility gone, replaced by a tentative mutual respect. One evening, Terran stayed late, troubleshooting a glitch in a tracking system. Lyra was across the warehouse, alone, working on a diagnostic panel. They worked in silence, the hum of machinery filling the space. When Terran finally fixed the glitch, he let out a quiet, "Yes." Lyra's voice carried across the room. "Nice work, Quill. Those systems can be stubborn." "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, hesitating before adding, "Can I ask you something?" She approached, stopping a few feet away. "Go ahead." Terran swallowed. "The stories about Nightfall, they say it was impossible. Was it as bad as they claim?" Lyra's gaze grew distant, and for a moment Terran thought he'd crossed a line. Then she spoke, her voice low. "Impossible is just a word, Quill. It's only impossible until someone does it. Then it's just hard, and hard is something any trained airman can handle." It wasn't a full answer, but it was enough. Terran met her eyes. "I used to think the best soldiers were the ones with the loudest stories, the most medals." "And now?" Lyra asked, her tone curious but guarded. "Now I think the best ones are the ones who do the job without needing the world to know." A faint smile touched Lyra's lips. "You're learning." She checked her watch. "It's late. Wrap up and rest." As she walked away, Terran called after her. "Thank you, ma'am. Not just for Nightfall, but for what you do here." Lyra paused, surprised, then nodded once before disappearing into the dark. The warehouse found its new normal. Lyra, still wearing her captain's insignia, led her team with quiet authority. Terran watched her train new techs, her scars no longer a punchline, but a testament to a life he could barely fathom. "Some heroes wear medals," Maracade said one day, watching share their stories with the world, "but carry them in silence. That's the real strength, Quill. The kind that doesn't need an audience,